Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome again to another weekly Wednesday webinar. And we're delighted this evening to have Dr. Nathaniel Swain from Think Forward Educators. And we're going to have an interactive session, a little bit different tonight, that Nathaniel will lead, where we're shifting the conversation about the science of learning. So hope you've got your thinking caps on, and I know Nathaniel will be provoking our thinking this evening. So I'll hand over to Nathaniel. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. And thanks for joining me this evening. It's an absolute pleasure. So to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm an aspiring teacher and a long-time speech pathologist. My research has been very much around explicit and direct instruction, particularly for language and literacy skills. But my interests are firmly broadened now into the instructional space. And I want to have this conversation with you tonight about shifting the conversation about the science of learning. And the reason for that is, we'll go to my next slide. So in many ways, everyone would be familiar who's attending an event like this with the war of ideas. So whether it's the reading wars, the maths wars, or the history wars. And unfortunately, time has at least shown so far that this war doesn't really get won on evidence, particularly not evidence alone. If it was, then there wouldn't be a war anymore. So I'd like to, I guess, have a conversation with you this evening about the importance of people like us who are scientifically minded professionals who need to have evidence, but we should also be aware that throwing the book hasn't really worked so far, by throwing the study at things. So in many ways, some of the practices and the issues that we're seeing are impervious to rational and evidenced debate. One of the reasons for this is that humans are very biased. Confirmation bias is a really big part of that, but also self-interest and the costs involved in changing positions. The educational establishment and pedagogy itself, so the nature of teaching and learning, has actually become so politicized that generations of academics and educators have invested their entire careers in a certain position and a certain way of seeing education in the world. So I'm wanting to shift the conversation and try and think about the science of learning in a different way. So selling a different message. So instead of just throwing the book or a study, what I'm imploring everyone to engage in this evening and to think about in the work that they do is actually trying to change the conversation. So go to values, go to the purpose of education, the reasons of the importance of social equity and social benefits of education, social justice, and also things like teacher workload and success, making life easier for teachers and well-being of teachers and students. So I'll be talking a lot about direct and explicit instruction. I'm actually going to use a lot of these terms interchangeably because in terms of the overall scheme of the science of learning, these distinctions aren't that important for this evening's discussion. So I'm not talking about big DI, like a direct instruction commercial program. I'm actually talking generally more about direct and explicit teaching approaches. And I'm not going to distinguish that much between EDI or explicit instruction alone or direct instruction alone. So I hope that makes sense. So this evening, I want to take you through some of the old debates and also the old wars, and then also look at basically things from a market research perspective on how these ideas are perceived. We'll also then look particularly spending a bit of time on shifting backward thinking, and that's where the title of the talk comes from, and actually where our community of educators has sort of originated out of as well, of seeing these old debates as actually quite backward in the way that they frame things, and that we need a new, fresh way of thinking and a forward thinking approach. And I'm going to finish up with some pointers or some little tips on my views on how to sell the science of learning. And I hope that will be formed by other people's input tonight. So I'll encourage you to voice your views and your opinions on the chat, and we'll incorporate that in the talk tonight. So before we begin, let's look briefly at some of these old debates. So in many ways, I know this seems crazy to think that explicit direct instruction is associated with a behavioralist approach, like the Skinner sort of old behaviorist view. But in many ways, in teaching degrees right now, students are being taught that these old approaches from the 50s are based on these views of seeing kids like little lab rats, which is the connotation, and that education is just a form of changing behavior. In radical contrast to this, of course, is constructivism, which is the view that children aren't just blank slates or tabula rasa. Instead, they are actively constructing their own learning and making sense of their world and their own models or schema of how they understand the world already. So as a result, the teaching implied should be very actively created and should be based on trying to get all of the students actively engaged, and you can't really directly teach anything is the extreme version of this view. This can be contrasted with things like phonics and whole language. Some important parts of this debate are that, this is obviously an age-old debate, is that whole language very much aligns with that constructivist view, whereas phonics can be seen as aligning with a more behavioralist view or a traditional education view. And I would argue that that's not necessarily the case anymore. And obviously there's more to the science of reading and the science of learning than just phonics. But this is essentially how they pit these two ideas together in a lot of these education circles. And then you can see how that's overlaid with traditional versus progressive education. And the progressive education movement is certainly wrapped up in constructivism. And ironically, given where the science is at now, probably isn't actually very progressive anymore. It just has that label. But it's more progressive in the sense of seeing itself as politically very progressive. So let's contrast all of that with some of the main principles from Barak Rosenshine, who's done a lot of work in this space of trying to operationalize some of the things we've learned from cognitive science. And these are the 10 principles of instruction he wrote in a paper where he originally had a group of 18 or 20, I believe, and he's now created a slightly easier version of the paper, which brings it together a little bit differently. So things like beginning the lesson with a review of previous learning, presenting new material in small steps, which from a constructivist opinion would be problematic already because you're breaking ideas down in a way they shouldn't be broken. Asking a large number of questions and checking the responses of all students. So that's not necessarily that problematic from a constructivist perspective. But checking the responses of all students might not be something that's diligently done in a constructivist classroom. It might just be choose people who put up their hand. Providing models and worked examples, there's the core of the explicit teaching there, and guiding students to practice using the new material. So that guided practice aspect, which few can argue with the importance of that. Then we've got checking for understanding and correcting errors. So even that language of correcting errors, although it makes perfect sense from the perspective of cognitive science, actually might be viewed as quite negatively. That the idea that students can actually have errors and actually they have more like alternative views or alternative conceptions is the way that it's framed up in a lot of the debates around teaching science, for instance. You can't use the word misconception. You have to instead say alternative conception, which I find a really niggly distinction, which gets in the way of teachers actually helping kids find the truth. You also need to obtain a high success rate, which I obviously wouldn't argue with, and providing scaffolds for difficult tasks. Monitoring independent practice and requiring that is obviously very important, and setting students up for success is obviously why this independent practice is happening at number 9, and then monthly and weekly reviews. So hopefully if we can agree on all of those core principles as just one way of thinking about explicit instruction, and obviously there's many other ways as well. Some of the other ideas I'm drawing upon are from these texts from Dehaan, Christodoulou, Willingham, and Kirshner and colleagues. But if we agree on those, what are some of the implications? Well, in many ways, most of your teaching will be explicit and it will be teacher-led. Much of it will involve clear modeling of what you're wanting the students to do. They'll be guided and independent practice. That part is less controversial if you're thinking from a constructivist perspective. But crucially, we're moving from part to whole. So this is a big problem for people who really hold on to balanced literacy and whole language views, for instance, or even the new ways of thinking about maths from a problem solving perspective. Working from tiny parts up to wholes can be seen as problematic because you're denying students the opportunity to struggle with a problem without knowing anything about it. It also implies focusing on mastery, so getting students up to a certain standard and making sure they master skills before you move on. That also is a very critiqued idea in constructivist circles, although for me it makes complete sense. And it also requires a structured, systematic, knowledge-rich curriculum. And curriculum itself is a really controversial word in a lot of education circles, as many of you may be aware of, let alone something that's structured, systematic, or knowledge rich. So we'll get into some of those a bit later. But these are, if we agree that these are the implications, what I want to do now with you is take you through some market research, essentially. So what do we think of when we think of constructivist inquiry-based learning? I've got it in red here because we're actually going to start with honest views this evening from the participants. And I'm guessing we have a bit of a biased sample. It's not a cross-section of every kind of teacher and every kind of education researcher here tonight. I'm guessing we're leaning more to an explicit direct group. So I'd like to get your opinions on, I guess, what is involved in, what comes to mind as a brand when you think of constructivist or inquiry-based learning. So in the chat, I would love you to just put the words that first come into your mind, and I'm going to add them in on the slide. Okay, here they come.
They're coming thick and fast now.
Yep. Okay, and if you want to read out some of them to me, Michael, so in case I get lost.
Go away and research a topic. Everyone is unique, different, play-based. Lots of student-directed, student-centered, led by students. Exploration, integration. Active learning. Students choose their own interests, so student choice. Negotiated curriculum. Not explicit. Project-based learning. Vague. Student voice.
That's what I think of.
Discovery time. Tina said 21st century learning. It's a good buzzword. Discovery-based learning. A couple of discoveries.
And I'm noticing that the color of the word is more of a red color. I'm looking more for when you're actually thinking of the problems with constructivist inquiry-based learning. I wonder if you can put some of those key ideas that come to mind of why that might be not working for every single student. So I'm getting some positive things through there. Oh, here we go. Rebecca said, assuming knowledge.
Yep.
Yep.
Open-ended. Don't know what you don't know. I like that one, Melinda.
Yeah. Everyone can read my scrolls.
Students think too broadly. Kids need structure. It's used to teach novices who cannot draw from sufficient knowledge.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, going too quick now.
What we'll do as well is keep the chat, because this might be great to have. I might put all this into a word cloud or something as part of the follow-up to the presentation. So I'll save the chat from today as well, because I won't be able to capture everything. But not great for kids who have difficulties. Yep. Yeah.
ASD, ADHD. I think some of that came up. Lack of basic skills to work from. Don't have necessary skills. Assuming capital. Everyone is bringing the same learning skills. Tony said shallow investigation of topic.
Okay, great. Now, once we got that started, we couldn't stop. It's like a faucet that we couldn't turn off. So I'm going to go to the next slide.
Overwhelms working memory attention. Well done, Steve. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go now. Now, this is a little bit of a repeat of what we've done, because we've got some positive ones in there already. But if you are trying to sell constructivist inquiry-based learning, what are some of those really strong positives? I want you to get into the mind of an education lecturer who's been teaching this for the last 10 years or 20 years. What are they really pushing to say why this is the best approach possible? What are the values and things? Child-centered, I've got from Natalie Campbell, thank you.
Engagement. Student voice, voice and choice, agency and voice. Future focused. More student voice, student engagement, allows extension, motivation, differentiated, agency again, how they will learn as adults, creative, progress-driven, holistic participation, open-ended.
Wrangling the dog in the background, open-ended, definitely.
Working with others.
Yeah, so I'm going to put collaborate.
Freedom, creativity, imagination. Child's innate interest in learning. So this idea that children have an innate, they're curious creatures, not cognitive misers. It's an interesting one.
All right, I think we've got the picture. So we can easily sell this, right? It's easy to sell. This is why it's picked up by so many education journalists who aren't sure of any alternative. It's repackaged and reprogrammed with slightly different labels as what we should be doing in school. It's the exact opposite of traditional education. It's seen as really fantastic, and it's all about 21st century skills, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the easy one in my view of why it's easy to sell this. Let's stay in the mindset of the teacher who's been teaching like this for many years and believes in it. And I want you to do the same thing, but critiquing direct explicit instruction. So why would this, what are the things that come to mind, or the conversations that you've had with colleagues who believe, or run straight on the path with lecturing? Great.
Boring, no student voice.
Not active.
Boring, not active,
yes.
Restrictive, one size fits all. No negotiation, not differentiated, repetitive, doesn't cater for gifted, chalk and talk.
Right.
Being talked at, teachers get bored repeating, scripted, no creativity. Removes
too fast to keep up with there. That's great. Fantastic.
No student choice. Too intense. Right. Suzanne said.
Yeah. Right. Passive
learning. Yeah.
Right. We know about this rhetoric. We've understood.
Old school.
From the
no challenge.
Yep.
20th century. Too loud for kids with sensory.
Right. All right. We've got the picture. Keep going if you've got a few more. Factory model, of course. You get the idea. It's easy to critique this. It's easy to write an article saying this is why it's no good. It's easy to use an anecdote of, I can't believe that people are still wanting to do this. I did this back in the 50s or 60s, in terms of an education reporter who's a little bit older. Easy to critique. What I want to do now, try and flip that completely. And let's think about the critiques of explicit or direct instruction, and try and think not about the evidence, because I'm not interested in evidence right now. I'm thinking about stories, values, what it makes people feel. So I want you to try and push the very positive things about this. All right, success.
Success, it works. Give kids success. Learning happens, very clear expectations, well-crafted lessons, structure, equity, leave no one behind. Oh, too quick again. Low variability, all students exposed to content, engagement, routine, no assumptions, clear goals, inclusive of ASD, nothing left to chance, trauma-informed, Shan said. Easy to differentiate, efficient time use, Natalie, modeled thinking, super interactive and responsive, Rebecca said, learning as a community, shared language.
All right. So much. I can put more on there. I think we've got it though. So I'm going to come back to this slide at the end, because I'm going to basically take you through now some potential claims and just suggest some ideas for how we might actually rebut them, not using evidence, because as I've made the contention at the start of the talk, it's obviously we have the evidence that, if we didn't have the evidence, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But the evidence, I don't think, will actually win these debates or these arguments, especially with people with really strong views or with years of experience who don't want to change. So instead, I'm going to suggest different ways of shifting this backward thinking. So not hitting it with a bulldozer, not throwing a book or a study, but actually just trying to shift it. We have to acknowledge that some of these ways of thinking are pretty backward. They don't reflect modern ways of thinking about the brain and how learning actually happens. A lot of them are based on tropes and stereotypes. So it's important to try and acknowledge that there is backward thinking there, but you're not going to fix it by just hitting it with a hammer. It's all about shifting. So this is at least what I'm trying to contend this evening. So here's one claim for you. Explicit instruction pushes a traditional right-wing agenda on children and teachers. I'm going here really early because this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, for our current community of educators and the current movement that we're on, is that there is this connotation that what we're trying to push for is actually very traditional, and it's something that the Conservatives really love, and that it pushes these ideas onto children and teachers. And given that most schools and most teachers actually have a slightly left-wing bias, if not an extreme left-wing bias, if in certain education faculties because of the nature of their work, we can't have this connotation. So what we can do for it: acknowledge that there are conservative overtones. Just acknowledge it. Don't deny that it's not there, but then actually try and shift to the benefits, the left. So one of the reasons why we're called Think Forward educators is because we're trying to change this backward way of thinking about the science of learning. And because we are looking to build literacy for the purpose of social equity. We want every student to achieve and to have the same opportunities in life. And that's why that science of learning is the approach to actually, it's a left-wing sort of push in many ways. Like, I'm a big lefty, I can say that to everyone. But my policy really matter, of course.
Nathaniel, Bronwyn's asked a good question. Bronwyn, it's not a dumb question. It's just disappeared off my screen. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, what's an example of a conservative overtone? Yeah. So the biggest thing I think that stands in the way of this movement is that it's too easily dismissed as phonics. Oh, that's from the 1950s. What do they want to do? Line the kids all up in rows and get out the big ruler and the big stick again, or they want kids to be lining up all like perfect little workers and training them to become, you know, the next proletariat or the working classes and things like that. This way of teaching, you know, refuses to acknowledge that students can craft their own futures and they shouldn't have a view of the world forced upon them. I think one of the other challenges is that a lot of the science of learning is picked up by more conservative media, and it is talked about in more conservative circles. The conservative government, so the Liberal government in Australia, for instance, is more interested in this and has adopted more policies towards this. And it's the same in the US and the UK as well. So as a result, it's wrapped up within this larger discourse of, if you want me to go really technical, neoliberalism, which is the idea that we're trying to enforce this this sort of new economic future where we privatize education and we basically stop schools from becoming the magical creative places that they need to become. So it's in some ways it's been described, the science of learning, for instance, it hasn't been called that necessarily, that's our term, but it's these views that are encompassed by the science of learning have this, I guess, you know, they're put all together into this right-wing conspiracy sort of theory in many ways. So I would acknowledge that there are those overtones and that, yes, some conservative governments do want this. Maybe they want it for good reasons. Maybe they haven't actually looked into the reasons why they want it. It just aligns more with their values. But I would then shift to the benefits to the left and say, actually, this should be the Greens policy. This should be Labor's policy, because this is something that benefits every child, and especially those who are currently not doing very well because of our education system or because of other systemic factors that influence their life chances. That's really where the shift needs to happen. So it benefits all children, especially those who cannot supplement their education. So unfortunately, a lot of the problems are hidden in terms of the actual educational failure that's happening, because when middle-class parents see their children struggling at school, they actually just fix the problem themselves. They can pay for tutors, they can pay for psychologists or speech pathologists, they can get on top of the problem. They can go to a more expensive private school that has better intervention programs, et cetera, et cetera. That same can't be said for those students who don't have all of those luxuries and resources and benefits at their disposal. There's the speech pathologist who can't speak. So something I would avoid is any sort of admission that things were better in the good old days. I would just avoid that completely, because you actually just play right into this view that, oh, look at all of these science people. They're just very conservative, wanting to bring back the 1950s and 60s approaches where they had big rulers and they got everyone to chant and drill and kill and et cetera, et cetera. So just avoid that altogether. All right, let's do another one. And number 2 could be, there is no science of instruction. Teaching is an art, or at most a craft. This is almost a direct quote from some teaching training materials. So I would actually, to rebut this, I would acknowledge that there is complexity of the classroom and student. There is no magic bullet. There's no one study or one scientific view that can do this. I would also say that science is actually fallible. Meaning that there's no perfect model or scientific view or one exact way of looking at things. The role of science is to find the best possible model or theory based on the information we have right now, and it's constantly changing. So then I would shift the conversation to thinking about universals, about how people learn best. So although we can't do everything based on the science, because you can't turn your classrooms into a laboratory, but what you can do is use some of these universals. So things like clear explanations, modeling, worked examples, building from simple to complex. Because of the cognitive science, we know that these things work best nearly every time. So this is the kind of stuff we should be promoting, not avoiding. So I would avoid saying that teaching is an exact science, or that randomized controlled trials provide some sort of truth. If you wanted to get into the nitty gritty of the problem with truth, the whole view of constructivism, just very quickly, is there's another constructivism called radical constructivism, which is the idea that the very nature of reality is constructed, and you can't actually get at reality through objective observation. It's purely through subjective experience. So they don't like scientific studies of any kind because of that. So it's, you can go into really sort of weird places when you try and say that this is the truthful way or this is irrefutable. Just note that it's fallible. It's not perfect. Science isn't perfect. The idea is it's the best information we have right now. I'm not exactly following the chat, but if there's something that really important that comes up, feel free to interrupt.
Yep.
I will invite people to add to different ways of rebutting these claims as well. These are just some ideas that I've created. I'd love to hear more people's responses. So number 3, it might work well for kids with learning difficulties, but direct instruction stifles kids who are doing well. This is a really, really common view. So I'd acknowledge that EDI or direct instruction does work well for kids with difficulties. Don't shy away from that, but then shift to the lifting effect that it can have for all students. So the middle and higher students can actually go even further with explicit instruction. They can reach mastery sooner. They can have a richer understanding of the skills and the knowledge they need to achieve mastery, and then they can do more with those skills faster. So move on to inquiry and application of their knowledge once they've got it. So I wouldn't say we shouldn't worry about the middle and high kids, saying, it's a moral imperative to take care of those who are struggling. I just wouldn't say that, because it just plays into the idea that, well, this approach really only works for kids with problems, or I've had some really awkward conversations with some lecturers who just don't want to talk about kids who aren't learning in the way that they should be learning. They're not interested in that. They really want to just help kids who are going to learn properly or learn the right way. And it's really quite sad, given most of my career I've spent with kids with learning difficulties, and how they can achieve if they're given the right instruction, but they certainly can't achieve if they're ignored or sidelined. So that being said, I'd really stress that this does actually work well for middle and highest achievers. Otherwise, you play into this problem. All right, number 4. This is fun, this one. Traditional rows, which is like desk rows, discourages collaborative learning. So I would acknowledge that without checking for understanding through pair shares, this might actually be the case. So if you had a lecture style format where you spoke at children for 30 minutes or 60 minutes straight, yes, I would agree that there's not a lot of collaborative learning going on. But then I would shift and say there actually are very fantastic opportunities for collaboration just by turning some chairs around. So if you have all of your rows set out, see if this works, like so, and you maybe got a set of rows like this, and the whiteboard is at the front of the room. You've got chairs behind, and they're all facing the one way. If you actually just turn these chairs around for the purpose of the activity, suddenly you've got some collaborative learning going on. The other thing that you've got is if you're constantly doing pair shares or turn and talk, whatever you call it, you actually got this pair and this pair constantly talking to each other. You'd have them in groups of 2, for instance. I haven't drawn that very well. So there is constant checking and interaction and collaborative sort of checking for understanding and guided practice throughout the lesson. Rows does not prevent you from doing that, whether it's rows on the floor or rows in traditional desks. So I'd also then talk about the benefits for the visibility of instruction to students. So actually say that for some students, they really need things to be at the right level. They need things to be audible. They need things to be visible. And when you're having these group chairs where people are turning around and having to turn like this to face the board, that actually makes it very difficult for them to engage in the explicit teaching and get their head around what's going on. So it's actually an OH&S and ergonomic sort of issue in many ways. I would avoid though saying that rows improve discipline, even if this is actually true. That sort of overtone of like you're just trying to create like ranks and files of students and seeing students as little cadets, that is problematic and actually just plays into that rhetoric around the science of learning is trying to control and factorize and create little industry out of kids. All right, so too much whole class instruction prevents teachers from catering for student needs. I've actually just encountered this claim recently, both in practice and also in some initial teacher education materials. So I would acknowledge the importance of ensuring every child learns. So don't say that it's not important or that you should just let that happen. But I'd shift to emphasizing that maximizing time with the teacher is the actual goal. So having more time with the teacher instructing is what's going to improve students' abilities to stay on task and to keep them going. So talk about the importance of RTI as well, response to intervention, and how your whole class instruction is where that initial support happens. And then there's tier 2 and there's tier 3 as well to ensure that students keep pace or catch up with their peers. And then I'm using something from Reed Smith's talk from Think Forward a few months ago. I'm not sure if this is his quote or someone else's. Apologies, Reed. Differentiation should happen through the support that you give, not the content that you cover. So every child in the classroom should be able to access the same level of content, but the differentiation is through your support that you provide. It's okay to teach to the middle. I would avoid this completely. This is seen as very problematic. It's disregarding the kids at the bottom. It's disregarding those who need extension. It plays right into those issues, as I've talked about before. All right, number 6. If you focus too much on the small steps, students won't understand why they are doing it. This is particularly useful for the recent proposed changes to the Australian maths curriculum. So they've basically sort of downplayed and removed the importance of procedural knowledge and fluency, and they've basically said that all kids should learn through problem solving and rich tasks all the time. And this is obviously a problem because you can't assume that novices can like experts in those really difficult tasks. And it's also disadvantaging those who don't have that knowledge already. So you're enhancing inequity by doing that. But what would I say to this claim? I would emphasize the importance of conceptual understanding, first of all. Of course, the goal is for every student to understand richly what they're doing, what they're talking about, whether it's for maths or for science or for literacy and so on. I would then pivot to the importance of fluency and automaticity to actually facilitate understanding. That this isn't a one-way relationship of understanding comes first and then you become fluent, or fluency comes first and then understanding follows. It's definitely reciprocal. And in many ways, if you're not fluent and automatic, you'll never reach the level of understanding that you're wanting to at those higher levels, especially once you're moving into higher level maths or higher level literacy that requires all of those foundational skills to be down pat. I would avoid saying kids should learn to follow procedures just because, or something similar to that. Although it's tempting to say that kids should just learn times tables just cause, even if you believe that strongly. I believe that students should learn times tables for many reasons, but I would always actually lead with the above rather than saying this by itself. You leave yourself too open to critique and you shut the conversation down, unfortunately, because you're not finding that common ground. All right, how are we going for time? Oh, awesome, we've got heaps. Number 7. So this is an interesting one. Teachers must plan their own lessons and create their own resources to suit their students' individual needs. This is a really common conception and claim that is made. And unfortunately, it is at odds with the research about what actually works best. How would you rebut this? So I would, first of all, so that's never in doubt, I would acknowledge the importance of teacher autonomy and their understanding of planning. Because some people think that if you don't get teachers planning every single lesson, suddenly they'll forget what planning involves and they won't know how to make a link between the curriculum, the students' needs, the assessment, and back again. So there's something really strongly, there's like an obsession with the amount of planning that initial teachers need to be able to learn. So pre-service teachers need to do all of this planning from scratch with no help. And if they can't do that, then they fail the placement. That's a really strongly held belief. So although we don't believe in that strong view, I wouldn't discount the importance of planning and understanding how to do that, as well as also responsiveness as well. Like, you need to be responsive to your students' learning. But then I'd shift to actually the benefits of collaborative and systematic development of curriculum. How can one teacher actually do everything perfectly, lesson by lesson, week by week, and finding the exactly right resources that respond exactly to their students' needs, and also teach the concepts in the best possible way? It's an impossible task, and it sets teachers up for a lot of pain, a lot of failure, in my opinion. So I would actually then sell and say increasing the time to focus on the responsive delivery, or the pacing, the facilitation, and also formative assessment is the benefit of having more collaborative and systematic curriculum that's created for teachers and by teachers, and delivered then by teachers and evaluated later, rather than trying to plan as you go. I would avoid saying something like this: teachers should follow scripted lessons to a T. This is a really difficult one because of the success of certain programs that do have lots of scripts, but I basically would try and circumvent that. I wouldn't stress that very much, because scripts are almost seen as antithetical to teachers' practice in some circles. So you can avoid that by saying that, yes, teachers are involved in planning, but no, they don't have to plan every single lesson from scratch the night before or the week before. It's not helpful for their workload, and it's not helpful for students getting the best possible instruction.
Nathaniel, I think Bronwyn's got a good question there.
Yeah, read it to you.
So Bronwyn says she's interested in this tension. How do we rethink what it means to plan a lesson as a novice, so that we don't overwhelm novices by asking them to write lesson material from scratch, while scaffolding them across multiple placements with different mentors towards being able to plan a lesson well? In reality, in most schools, they'd be asked to plan their own lessons at least, or write lessons for a team.
Exactly. I was actually just thinking about this earlier, Bronwyn. It's interesting you've asked that question. One of those thoughts that comes to you in the shower or something like that, I think. So I was thinking through that. In many ways, I think you should think about, what's the word I'm looking for? Apprenticing teachers to planning. So rather than expecting them to go from 0 to 100 and plan an entire lesson from scratch, actually provide worked examples and provide models of plans with certain parts of the plan missing, so they actually only have to fill in certain details, or exercises where they look at a plan and they try and see where the curriculum links were, or they look at a lesson and try and map what their mentor teacher has done to the plan, so that they get the sense of certain nuts and bolts of what they're doing in terms of planning, and then slowly building them up to be able to plan the review part of the lesson, and then building up to do the explicit teaching part of the lesson, while the mentor teacher or the supervising teacher does a different part. And then eventually going up to a whole sort of thing. And towards the end of the degree, you'd want them to be able to plan a unit as well, but they should have already had a lot of practice and a lot of guided practice and explicit teaching in how to plan, rather than what's usually taught in universities at the moment, which is very vague subjects about the importance of the philosophy of planning, which focus very little on the nuts and bolts and the do's and do nots, and certainly don't feature a lot of good lesson structure that aligns with what we know about the science of how students learn. So obviously there's that challenge. PST, pre-service teacher. So they actually have to write a lot of plans. And I would argue that because of that lack of structure, a lot of their plans might not be very good. And that's also setting teachers up for not a very good experience once they start practicing, especially if they've been given a year level and they don't plan collaboratively and they're expected to create every lesson from scratch. It's quite daunting, and it doesn't help apprenticeship teachers to get to where they need to be, which is confident to plan, but also very confident to deliver, first of all, and then to step out of themselves and evaluate how that's gone, and then look at that in the broader context of what they've been planning and how it fits in with a unit and the whole year planner, for instance. Hope that covers that question. Cool. And Louise has raised a really interesting point. So why does it feel like we're reinventing the wheel every year with lessons? Exactly. So whether the Department of Education would actually create a bank of lessons, I don't know if they would ever do that, because it exposes them to way too much criticism. If they actually tell teachers what to do explicitly, it means that it's very easy for the education circles or people like us to look at it and say, well, that isn't very good. Obviously, they've got little bits and pieces of lessons, but certainly not whole units with lessons and resources already given to you, which is actually what teachers really need when they're first practicing, to see high quality curriculum to be able to implement it. Tanya's noted that New South Wales is starting to do this with early reading instruction, which is fantastic. And what political party is running New South Wales state government at the moment? The Liberals, of course. So that's also then going to be open to a lot of critique by the education faculties, because they won't like that they're actually specifying those materials, and they won't like some of the stuff that's in there because it's going to be quite explicit. So obviously this links back to what we've been saying. Let's go to the next one. So number 8, I think this is one of the most problematic ones that I've encountered, and one of the most disheartening as someone who's really trying to advocate for students with learning difficulties for most of my career so far. Students should take responsibility for their own learning. How would you rebut this? Oh, I've got my critique thing coming on. Oh, sorry, this one I've actually left blank. So I want to take some of these through discussion now. So I've given you some models of how you might rebut things. I'd love to get some ideas from people in the chat. So you'll notice the pattern is to actually acknowledge the claim first of all, and the part of the claim that's true. So I wonder if someone wants to do that and we can add that in. So explicit instruction, oh, I've gone to the wrong thing, sorry. Let's go back to students should take responsibility for their own learning. So what, I guess from the chat, if you want to, you can contribute and say what part of this is actually true that are acknowledging is good, or before we move on to actually shifting this view.
Well, students need to put in some effort.
Yep. And they do need to take some responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then let's shift it. So that if that's a nice little acknowledgement, what's the shift? So Alison has said, giving them solid skills allows them to be more flexible and creative. Yeah. Yeah. Needs more learned peer or facilitator to guide their learning and removing scaffolds after mastery. Yeah. So if we want to sell that to this person who's making this claim, I would frame it as there's a lot of students, if they're left in charge of their own learning, who'll actually be left to languish. So a lot of students would actually miss out when someone's not taking charge of their learning. The reason I've included this one is because some teachers do actually absolve themselves in many ways because of survival in seeing so many students not doing very well and saying, well, there's only so much a teacher can do. The student actually is in charge. If they don't want to do the work, they don't want to do the work. If the parents don't want to read to them at home, the parents don't want to read to them. And so they'll have to, in some ways, accept that if they want to accept that they're trying their very best, which of course they are. Does not take charge. Okay. Are there any things that we want to avoid for this one? I've got some great things coming through as well. They need to be taught to be self-determined. Yep. Oh, what's the meanest question? Yep. How can you be responsible for what you don't understand yet? So that's that issue of agency, I think, definitely, is how do students take control of what they want to do with their learning if they don't actually know that much about what's available to learn about. If they don't have a lot of rich understanding of history, geography, science, mathematics, literature, you don't know what you don't know. So they're going to choose things that they already know something about. And the students who have had great experiences going to museums or trips overseas will have some things that they might actually be quite academic that they want to look into. And the kids who haven't might choose things from popular culture that may not actually warrant some airtime in an academic setting, given that everything that you focus on is an opportunity potentially wasted. Great, there's lots of things coming through. So things that I would avoid: blaming students for the lack of progress. Yes, yep. So don't blame. Yeah. And something else I would avoid here is saying to the person, I don't actually believe, I wouldn't say something like, well, students can't be trusted with their own learning. Everything has to be packaged for them. There really shouldn't be any student choice. Even if you believe at some points in the curriculum, student choice doesn't really matter that much, I would always acknowledge that there needs to be some choice there somehow. They need to have some sort of agency in what they're doing, even if it's something small or something, a forced choice between two different things. So that's something I wouldn't say in terms of students don't need any choice, which obviously isn't true, but in some extreme examples, you might find yourself saying that because you're so frustrated with the person who can't understand why it's not great for students to decide they want to do a whole unit on QPAC or something for a whole time. All right, let's do another one. Explicit instruction won't make up for differences between students due to poverty. So what's something we could acknowledge here? I'll see how we go for time, how many of these we can get through. Poverty is a real issue. Yeah, let's do it. Great. Is real. But let's then shift. What would our shift be? Yeah, through education, we can actually reduce its impact. High expectations are really important. Yeah. Okay. Something I always say is education actually should be the great equalizer. At the moment, it sort of enhances a lot of inequity because of the instructional approaches that are in vogue. It means that kids that are going to do well are going to do well no matter what. Kids that aren't doing well won't often get a lot of support, and then they'll be blamed for it, or their poverty will be blamed for it. And some teachers will throw their hands up in the air and say, if only poverty could be fixed, all of these kids will be able to learn. And I think as a teacher, that's not your role. It's not your role to change economic policy. What your role is to try and do the very best of what education can do, which is change the opportunities for students before they become, young adults who have actually missed out on a lot of education. Right. All right, so lots of ideas coming through as well. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to go to the next one. We've got some others as well, which are quite, some of them get a little bit cheekier as we go. So we'll see if we've got time. Students need to have agency over their learning. This is similar to the one before, so I might skip it. So obviously you'd acknowledge that agency is important, but students shouldn't really be driving which part of history that they learn about, especially not in their first stage. Maybe they choose between two topics or choose which one they learn first if you really want to find some agency there, or if you're doing a unit on Greek mythology, they can choose which god that they look at first. That's fine. It doesn't really matter which way or the other in that situation, but you're not going to throw out the history curriculum because students don't want to learn about it. I think that's a really untenable position. Here we go. Learning should occur in authentic contexts, including rich tasks. So this is applied to the maths curriculum, for instance. This is very much about problem solving, rich tasks, complex tasks. Don't get students to do little sums. Don't get them to do repetitive exercises. All of that is really bad. It's also applied to the whole language phonics traditional debate, now the science of reading debate, saying that you can't break reading down into all these little skills. Literacy is so rich and so broad. It should be about reading whole books with kids. So what should we do? Let students choose which topic. Okay, that's from the previous one. Thanks, Ant. Any from here? Students can't understand without the underlining skills. Great. So that's going to be my shift. What is my acknowledgement going to be? Need underlying skills. What should I acknowledge? Agreed. The linking to real world is important. Yep. Link to real world is key. Yep. Something I would add there as well. Learning that happens in a classroom in which teachers are teaching explicit is not inauthentic. No teaching happens in a meaningless vacuum. Yep, that's a really great point from Bron as well. What I would say as well is that obviously the ultimate aim is for students to be able to learn and to teach themselves in every context and to learn from real life and learn from every social interaction and every book that they open or every mathematical or scientific problem they encounter. But you can't expect kids to just act like experts and be in these situations in order to become experts. So there's that classic idea of novices versus experts that's been talked about and summarized in a lot of great papers recently over the last 10 years. That's something that's really misunderstood. So I think that would be one of my key points there. However, I wouldn't say that kids should just focus on getting exercises right or mastering certain procedures or getting their head around skills, because the authentic stuff doesn't really matter. I would say, of course, we include authentic, rich learning experiences as well. All right. So I'm going to stop soon so we've got some time for questioning. I might do teaching kids knowledge. So this one is direct out of Daisy Christodoulou's 7 Myths About Education. So if you haven't seen some of her rebuttals to this claim, they're obviously fantastic. But this is a really strongly held belief that if you're actually just trying to teach kids knowledge and facts rather than letting them discover these for themselves and know that, you know, the very nature of history or the very nature of knowledge is disputed, you know, that's the extreme view held by a lot of education academics or educators, that kids shouldn't be taught things directly because it removes their opportunity to see that knowledge is fallible. Obviously, you can't hold that position if you know how important knowledge is for mastery of skills and the ability being an independent learner. So maybe I would acknowledge that obviously you're not teaching knowledge and facts just for the sake of it. You're teaching it so that kids actually can learn to become critical thinkers and creative thinkers. That's the ultimate goal. Don't dismiss the importance of creativity, problem solving, and things like that. Say how important it is and acknowledge that the path to get there is actually through knowledge and through telling those great stories and ensuring every student can learn to read and do maths. That's how they get there.
I love
awesome.
Steve, I love Steve's comment there. Knowledge is what you think with.
Yeah, it's that raw material. And I think in a recent, I completely agree with that. In a recent podcast, I think it was on Greg Ashman's Filling the Pail with John Sweller, they're talking about knowledge becomes that, and understanding becomes that, that infinitely rich source of information that you can use and draw upon in a given task. It can overcome all of the working memory limitations that we have if you already have mastered or understood something or can do something automatically and fluently. So knowledge cannot be more important to education. Knowledge and skills, I think, are really where it's at. And you can't become a critical thinker or a creative thinker or a problem solver without a rich understanding and knowledge of the world. All right. Let's do one more and then I'll open to questions.
Natalie said that first. So sorry, apologies, Natalie. I didn't see that one. So.
All right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Some of the other things I had here was around student discussions should be the primary driver of building understanding. If you're doing this video at home, you might think of ways of rebutting that as well. So there's the space for you to do that. There's also learning is more dependent on inspiration and motivation than on instruction. Have a go at that one as well. We don't have time for that this evening. Students learn best when they discover things from themselves through direct experience. This is straight from Piaget and Vygotsky. So there is a really good way to refute this. I hope you get an opportunity to do that as well. And I'd love to, if you're on Twitter or Facebook, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then I had a few extras here. Just some of the other themes were choosing knowledge is really problematic and who should decide what is taught and when. So that's one of the claims that's really made about curriculum. Too much explicit teaching stifles creativity of the student and the teacher. Too much teacher-led instruction prevents students from constructing their own learning. So all of these ideas which we can refute, but we're not going to just throw the book at people. That's what we're trying to get at this session. So let's skip right to the end. Yeah, onto these ones. Here we go. All right, we're up to the last bit. So how would you sell the science of learning? Well, I haven't got time to do the second brainstorm, but I think we've got the picture. In many ways, this is what I want you to take away from the process that we've gone through tonight. So thinking differently, thinking forward. First step, hold it in. Passionate rebuttals can really easily be dismissed. Try and actually be really well-reasoned and don't let your anger and frustration, of which I feel very strongly and which drives me every day, don't let that drive your conversation with someone who thinks in a different way to you. It's really easy to be dismissed as, oh, that person's really crazy about that issue, if you become so impassioned that you lose the opportunity to have a good discussion. look for the person's motivations and values. Look for your interactants' values and actually use these to shape your response. So when I'm thinking of playing different rebuttals and different caveats and things that I would avoid, I'm trying to anticipate what the underlying beliefs of the person is who's made that claim. And that's through lots of discussion and lots of reading of this literature and talking to these lecturers who have been my colleagues, for instance, and trying to get inside their heads. Look for common ground wherever possible and acknowledge where there is common ground. When you can, isolate what the backward thinking is that needs shifting and basically make this your focus. Think about how can I unpack this for someone and give them a story or give them a viewpoint that might help them to see differently. Always go for hearts and minds. Stories, narratives, feelings, all of these things actually change people's views. Ironically, evidence doesn't often change people's views. It's one of these really annoying things about humans is that we've got this confirmation bias where we easily dismiss a fact or a piece of evidence that does not accord with our worldview, especially if we're skeptical about the political persuasion of the person making it. So if it's a right-wing media or a right-wing group that's making these claims, they're easily just going to dismiss them as, oh, that's all just traditional education twaddle. So try and address and don't dismiss concerns and try and give sensible, calm rebuttals as we've given today. It's not about making people feel silly for not knowing things or throwing a study at them and saying, you should read this and then respond. I think that, as we've seen on Twitter many times, it doesn't often produce the results that we want. And then finally, try and play it smart. So acknowledge where educators or researchers have actually been wrong in the past. So say, look, I agree, behavioralism had a really narrow view of what learning is about. We shouldn't think about kids like they respond to stimulus and response. It's not that helpful when we're working with people. So don't be afraid to do that and try and build that common ground by playing into those viewpoints and really acknowledging things that you don't believe, which is really important as well. All right, so we're not going to do this last brainstorm, but I am going to finish so that there's at least, I don't know, 1 or 2 minutes, depending on how long you want to go for, Michael, for some questions. I'd love to hear from people. And it's been great to get so much interaction from everyone this evening. So thank you.
So have you got any questions for Nathaniel? We've got a minute or two before we wrap up. And I'd like
one thing I'll say.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you go.
No, you go.
Oh, one thing I was going to say is I think what's fantastic about the period that we're in at the moment, if we're thinking about our sort of contemporaries in this era, is there are so many people who are singing from the same songbook and have read these amazing studies and amazing pieces of work by thinkers in the science of learning. And it can be easy to forget that the majority of teachers, the majority of the public, majority of researchers do not think like we do. If I'm speaking to the audience that I think I'm speaking to this evening. So it's important to try and step out of yourself and to try and see things from other perspectives and also think smart about how you approach something. Don't go in guns blazing and say how important this is and how it's going to change the world, even though we know that it is. Go really gently and try and find things that you can change slowly that can then have big impacts later on. Because if you change hearts and minds slowly over time, it's going to win a lot more of these battles that we've been waging for the last 30, 40, 50 years.
I could have been waging and raging.
Oh, yes. No, that's probably why I had that little slip there.
Do you want to...
Bronze done.
Yep.
One more question if you want to do that one.
Yep.
One other thing I'd like to add is the list of things to keep in mind is to always read our comments through the eyes of a hardworking, exhausted and clever teacher who's doing their best day in, day out. So I worry that some people in the SOL community, it's easy to laugh at teachers or mock teachers' work. Rather, we should go after departments and teacher preparation providers. And Ron said, don't tell anyone I said that. That's fantastic. So I think you're exactly right. And I think it definitely accords with my view is that teachers are doing their very best and they've been brought into and inculcated and enculturated within a system that actually gets them to focus on aspects of their practice that aren't very helpful, or to think that what they're doing should lead to kids learning, because these prevailing views of constructivism and inquiry-based learning and things like that are so pervasive. So it's important not to dismiss teachers and their expertise and how they have been working very hard and actually have to manage so many things and have a huge workload, which is why if you can find a selling point that reduces teacher load, but doesn't reduce their autonomy too much, it's a really important, a really good selling point. Fantastic.
All right, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. And I'd like to thank Nathaniel so much for all of the time and effort you've put into that this evening. It certainly provoked a lot of thinking, I think, for everybody, including me. There's a lot there that I've digested and I'll continue to digest around this, because I think we're at the beginning of a period of major change, and we're right at the beginning, the groundswell of change in education that people look back on in the future and say, well, we were around in that period of time. So I really do think we're pushing the envelope of what needs to happen and what will become the norm sometime in the future. But it is very early, and as you said, most people don't have the available insight and evidence and information that some of us on here have, and it is,
or even the
job.
time to digest it. Yeah, they just don't have the mental energy or the time to get their head around it, because their life is consumed with just trying to do the busy work of being a teacher.
That's right. So it is our job to advocate, and I totally agree with the idea of small steps. I think Steve wrote that, and what you've talked about, finding the common ground and not have the war, but try and persuade, and the hearts and minds is definitely the way to go. Evidence doesn't work, otherwise we wouldn't be in where we're at right now. So thanks so much for that.
Would tell us that, definitely. Yeah.
I've been impressed by everybody's comments, but even more so by the speed of the typing. It's certainly been too much for me to cope with as a moderator, but yeah. So
you've done an excellent job.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Nathaniel, again, thank you so much for this evening. I've really enjoyed what you've put up there and your insights and your thinking on that. So thanks so much, everybody, for your time and attention this evening, and for being part of our weekly Wednesday webinars. And if you aren't on Think Forward Educators, a bit of a plug for what Nathaniel's involved in there. Make sure you join up. It's very well worthwhile to be part of.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Everyone is welcome, of course. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. And this will be up on our YouTube channel in the coming days. So thanks so much for your time and attention. And I'm going to go and eat a pizza and watch the State of Origin. So go the Blues.
Fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate.